The filing cabinet on the third floor of the company's Commission of Malaysia building in Kuala Lumpur has a brass handle that has been polished by 31 years of use. The drawer labeled K through M slides open on bearings that were last lubricated in 2019. Inside that drawer, in a manila folder with a 6-digit reference number written in blue ink, sits a 47-page document that was submitted on a humid Tuesday morning in March by a paralegal who had no idea what she was carrying. The document is a corporate restructuring filing. It is dated, it is stamped. It is, under Malaysian commercial law, a public record, and on a Thursday afternoon 8 months later, at 2:14 p.m. Kuala Lumpur time, a researcher at a financial transparency nonprofit in Jakarta pulled that folder, photographed every page, and uploaded the images to a server in Geneva. What the researcher in Jakarta did not know, what no one outside 3 offices in 2 countries knew, was that the 47-page filing contained a single annex. The annex was titled, in English, Schedule 4-B. The annex was 3 pages long. And on the second of those 3 pages, in a table that listed 11 subsidiary corporate entities and their beneficial ownership percentages, appeared a name that should not have appeared in any filing connected to a Malaysian palm oil processing dispute. The name was the name of an American manufacturing conglomerate. The same American manufacturing conglomerate that, 4 weeks earlier, had publicly demanded that the United States government impose a 28% tariff on Malaysian electronic components on the grounds that those tariffs were necessary to protect American jobs. The tariff demand had been front-page news in 3 American newspapers. The corporate restructuring filing had not been news in any newspaper until Thursday. The researcher in Jakarta uploaded the images at 2:41 p.m. Kuala Lumpur time. By 5 p.m. That same afternoon, a lawyer in London had cross-referenced the beneficial ownership table against a separate set of court filings from a civil lawsuit being heard in the High Court of Malaya. The lawsuit, filed by a coalition of 1,847 plantation workers, alleged that a Malaysian subsidiary had violated labor protection statutes over a period of 9 years. The damages sought in Malaysian ringgit converted to $312 million in U.S. currency, not $31 million. $312 million. The defendant in that lawsuit was the subsidiary listed on page 2 of Schedule 4-B. Within 90 minutes of the cross-reference being completed, the connection had been documented, verified, and circulated to 4 financial newspapers. Within 90 minutes. Not 90 hours. Not 90 days. The tariff demand was not about jobs. The tariff demand was about leverage. The tariff demand was about a $312 million lawsuit that the American conglomerate had been trying for 19 months to make disappear. The numbers, once they began arriving, did not stop. The first figure came from a labor economics group in Penang at 9 a.m. local time on Friday morning. The number of American manufacturing jobs that would actually be protected by a 28% tariff on Malaysian electronic components, according to standard input-output modeling, was 1,400, not 14,000. Not 140,000, 1,400. The second figure came from a trade analytics firm in Singapore at 11 a.m. The number of American consumer products that would experience price increases as a direct result of the same tariff was 217 distinct categories, affecting approximately 84 million American households. The third figure came from a research note distributed by a Hong Kong financial firm at 1 p.m. The estimated annual cost to American consumers, in aggregate, of the proposed tariff was $11. $4 billion. $11. $4 billion. To protect 1,400 jobs. That is $8. $1 million per job per year. The fourth figure was the one that broke the narrative. The fourth figure came from the same financial transparency nonprofit that had pulled the corporate filing in the first place. The total combined legal exposure of the American conglomerate across the Malaysian labor lawsuit and 3 related class actions filed in Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines was $1. $4 billion, not $140 million. $1. $4 billion. The tariff, in other words, was not designed to recover jobs. The tariff was designed to create economic pressure on the Malaysian government severe enough that the Malaysian courts would deprioritize, delay, or quietly dismiss a labor lawsuit that the conglomerate could not win on the legal merits. The tariff was a lever. The lever had been disguised as a protection. The disguise had held for 4 weeks. It did not hold for a 5th. What the Prime Minister in Putrajaya did next, he did in a sequence so disciplined that observers later described it as the patience of a man who had been handed a brief he did not need to read because he had been writing it himself for 19 months. First, he did nothing visible for 72 hours. Not a press conference, not a diplomatic note, not a single line of public commentary. The silence forced the American conglomerate to begin defending itself before any official accusation had been made. By the end of the third day, the conglomerate had issued three separate clarifying statements, each of which contradicted the one before it. Second, he authorized the Malaysian Attorney General to file in open court a motion requesting that the High Court of Malaya accept the corporate restructuring filing into the evidentiary record of the labor lawsuit. The motion was procedural. The motion was also irrefutable. The corporate filing was a public document. The connection it established was a matter of mathematics, not interpretation. Third, he convened a meeting in Putrajaya with the trade ministers of 4 ASEAN nations and offered them a shared framework. Any future American tariff demand against any ASEAN member would be evaluated before any response was formulated against publicly available corporate ownership records for evidence of unrelated litigation leverage. The framework was not a treaty. It was a checklist. The checklist would be circulated to every ASEAN trade ministry within 14 days. And fourth, and most consequentially, he placed a single phone call. The call was to Brussels. Within 11 hours, the European Commission announced that it was opening a preliminary review of whether the American tariff demand constituted, under World Trade Organization frameworks, an improper use of trade policy for the purpose of influencing unrelated civil litigation in a third country. The review was framed as a routine inquiry. Everyone in the trade community understood what it actually was. It was the third crack. Aisha is 42 years old. She has worked on a palm oil plantation in the state of Sabah, on the northern coast of Borneo, for 17 years. She rides a bicycle to the processing facility every morning at 5:30 a.m., a distance of 4 kilometers along a road that floods during the monsoon season. She prepares a thermos of sweet coffee before she leaves. She is one of the 1,847 plaintiffs in the labor lawsuit. Her name appears on page 211 of the original filing, in a list that is alphabetical by given name. For 19 months, Aisha had attended court hearings in a building 300 kilometers from her village. She had taken unpaid leave to attend those hearings. She had ridden buses, trains, and a propeller aircraft to reach the courtroom. She had watched her lawyers argue against a corporate defendant, whose legal team had filed 41 separate procedural motions designed to delay the substantive hearing. She had watched the case grind forward at a pace that her own lawyers described, privately, as deliberate exhaustion. On the morning the corporate filing connection was reported on the front page of a Kuala Lumpur newspaper, Aisha was at the processing facility. Her supervisor walked across the loading bay and handed her a folded copy of the newspaper. He pointed at the headline. He did not say anything. Aisha read the article twice. She folded the newspaper. She put it in the woven basket on the back of her bicycle. For 19 months, she said to the woman working beside her, they told us this was a small case. Today the whole world knows it was the only case. The damage radiating from a single annex on the second page of a corporate restructuring filing did not stay within the boundaries of the labor lawsuit. It moved outward, in concentric rings, faster than any communications team in the American conglomerate's headquarters had modeled. Ring 1 was the lawsuit itself. The High Court of Malaya accepted the restructuring filing into evidence on the fourth day. The conglomerate's legal team withdrew 19 pending procedural motions within the next 48 hours. The substantive hearing, which had been delayed 7 times, was rescheduled for the following month. Ring 2 was the conglomerate's other litigation. The 3 class actions in Indonesia, Thailand, and the Philippines were each amended within 2 weeks to incorporate the corporate ownership documentation revealed in the Malaysian filing. The combined legal exposure, which had been $1.4 billion before the disclosure, was estimated by a Hong Kong analyst at $2.7 billion after. Ring 3 was the American political coalition that had supported the tariff. 2 of the 4 members of Congress who had publicly endorsed the 28% tariff withdrew their endorsements within 9 days, citing what one of them described in a written statement as material new information regarding the underlying commercial circumstances. The other 2 members did not withdraw their endorsements. They simply stopped speaking about the tariff. Ring 4 was the American business community. 4 of the largest American consumer electronics retailers, all of whom depended on Malaysian component supply chains, issued a joint letter to the United States Trade Representative requesting that the tariff demand be formally withdrawn. The letter cited the projected $11.4 billion in consumer cost. The letter did not cite the lawsuit. The letter did not need to. Ring 5, and the one that mattered politically, was the international perception of American trade policy. The European Commission's preliminary review, which had been framed as routine, was upgraded to a formal inquiry on the 11th day. Trade ministers from Japan, South Korea, and Australia issued parallel statements indicating that they would be reviewing recent American tariff demands against their own jurisdictions for similar patterns. The pattern, once named, became visible everywhere it had been hidden. The figure whose name carries more weight in American financial commentary than any other living investor had not addressed the disclosure during its first 10 days. He had given no interviews. He had written no letter. He had appeared on no broadcast. His silence, as it had been before, was a form of commentary. When Warren Buffett finally addressed the matter, it was in a brief written exchange with a business school student who had submitted a question for a quarterly correspondence program. The response was 5 sentences long. The response did not mention the conglomerate, the tariff, or the lawsuit by name. According to the published response, Buffett observed that the cost of a policy is not measured by what it claims to protect. The cost of a policy is measured by what it is actually designed to achieve. A company that asks a government to impose a tax on millions of consumers in order to influence the outcome of a lawsuit in a third country has not made an argument for protection. It has made a confession about its own legal position, and the confession, once filed in a public record anywhere in the world, will eventually be read. And then he offered the line that traveled. Every cabinet in every country opens eventually. The only question is who is in the room. The line was reprinted in 19 publications within 36 hours. It was framed and hung in the office of a transparency advocate in Geneva. It was printed at the bottom of an internal memo circulated by the ethics office of a Wall Street firm. But the line that the Prime Minister in Putrajaya had been holding, the line that he had drafted in a private notebook 19 months earlier and not spoken aloud to a single colleague, had not yet been delivered. It came on the 17th day. It came in a brief address to the Malaysian Parliament. It came at the end of a 51-second statement that concluded a session on national trade policy. A member of the opposition had asked, with appropriate procedural deference, whether the government considered the matter of the American tariff demand to be closed. The Prime Minister paused for 5 seconds. 5, not 50, 5. And then he said it. The tariff was the cover. The cabinet was the answer. The chamber went silent. Not a shocked silence. Not a triumphant silence. The silence of a parliament that had just understood that the Prime Minister had been waiting for 19 months for the precise moment when the leverage attempt would be visible enough to be named and discreet enough that naming it would require no further evidence than the public record itself. Within 4 hours, the line was trending in 34 countries. Within 12 hours, it had been translated into 21 languages. Within 5 days, it had been projected in white block letters on a black background onto the facade of a courthouse in Penang that faced directly across the square toward the Chamber of Commerce. The projection remained for 7 nights. A trade columnist for a Singapore newspaper called it the most efficient anti-corruption sentence ever spoken by a Southeast Asian head of government. A legal newspaper in The Hague printed it on the front page in 60-point type. A radio host in Manila read it at the top of his program for 4 consecutive mornings. The tariff was the cover. The cabinet was the answer. The phrase did not accuse, it did not condemn, it did not theorize. It simply described what had happened. The American conglomerate had tried to use the apparatus of national trade policy to influence the apparatus of a foreign court. Instead, it had created a public record that connected the two. The conglomerate had tried to disguise commercial litigation pressure as patriotic economic protection. Instead, it had revealed that the protection was theater and the pressure was strategy. The lobbyists who had drafted the tariff demand had assumed that the corporate filing in Kuala Lumpur would never be read by anyone outside 3 offices in 2 countries. Instead, they had discovered that every cabinet in every country opens eventually, and that the document waiting inside is the only document that matters. The deeper principle is older than any tariff filing. A policy that claims to protect one thing while serving another is not a policy. It is a story. And in the era of public corporate registries, of cross-border data verification, of nonprofit researchers with the patience to read filings that no one is expected to read, the story has a shelf life shorter than the leverage it was designed to provide. The leader who builds policy on a stated purpose, who can explain that purpose in any forum and to any audience, who treats the public record as a friend rather than a hazard, is the leader who survives the day the cabinet opens. Aisha, the 42-year-old plantation worker in Sabah, still rides her bicycle to the processing facility every morning at 5:30 a.m. The labor lawsuit, after 19 months of procedural delay, is now scheduled for substantive hearing in the spring. Her lawyers have stopped describing the case, even privately, as deliberate exhaustion. They describe it, when asked, as the case the world finally noticed. The filing cabinet on the 3rd floor of the company's Commission of Malaysia building still has the brass handle polished by 31 years of use. The drawer labeled K through M still slides open on bearings that were last lubricated in 2019. The manila folder with the 6-digit reference number is still inside. It has been photographed, scanned, archived, translated, and indexed. It is, as it always was, a public record. The tariff was the cover. The cabinet was the answer. Please hit the bell icon and subscribe my channel for daily updates.